There is a story in the Old Testament that I consider the most disturbing. Prepare yourself to enter a world where horror and faith collide. Today we will explore the book of Judges, chapter 19, where you will be shocked and left speechless. This is a story of betrayal, violence, and vengeance that occurred millennia ago, but whose echoes of terror can still be heard. This is the account of a terrible night in the city of Gibeah, a night that turned an act of hospitality into a bloody nightmare. If you have the courage, continue watching. This is the story of the Levite and his concubine, a story not for the faint of heart. In chapter 19, verse 1, it says, "In those days Israel had no king. A Levite who lived in a remote area in the hill country of Ephraim took a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah." I want you to understand that the Levites were members of the tribe of Levi, traditionally tasked with religious and priestly functions in Israel. This particular Levite lived in the hills of Ephraim, a more isolated and remote area. The concubine was a woman who had a lower status than a legal wife, but still lived in a marital relationship with the man. In the society of that time, concubines did not enjoy the same rights and protections as wives. The concubine was from a different region than her partner, highlighting the diversity within the tribes of Israel. Let's continue the story. The Levite, a man dedicated to serving God, found peace in the rustic beauty of his surroundings. But his heart was troubled because his concubine had fled to her father's house in Bethlehem in Judah. Determined to bring her back, he embarked on a journey that would lead him to face the depths of human wickedness. 4 months later, her husband went to persuade her to return. He took his servant and 2 donkeys. The woman took him into her father's house, and when her father saw him, he rejoiced. Her father-in-law, the girl's father, convinced him to stay there, and he stayed with them 3 days, eating, drinking, and sleeping there. On the 4th day, they got up early, and the Levite prepared to leave. But the girl's father said to his son-in-law, "Have something to eat, and then you can go." So the 2 of them sat down to eat and drink together. But the girl's father said, "Please stay another night and enjoy yourself." And when the man got up to go, his father-in-law persuaded him to stay another night. On the morning of the 5th day, when he prepared to leave, the girl's father said, "Let's eat. Wait until afternoon." So the 2 of them ate together. Then when the man with his concubine and servant got up to leave, his father-in-law, the girl's father, said again, "Look, the day is almost over. It's almost night. Stay here. Stay and enjoy yourself. Tomorrow morning you can get up and go home." Not wanting to stay another night, the man left for Gibeah, that is Jerusalem, with 2 saddled donkeys and his concubine. When night began to fall, they arrived at Gibeah in the tribe of Benjamin. With no place to stay, they decided to wait in the city square, hoping someone would offer them shelter. An old man returning from the fields saw the couple and offered them hospitality. Little did they know that this would be the last act of kindness they would receive that night. But outside the welcoming walls, the night held dark secrets. As they dined, a brutal bang echoed through the door. The faces around the table paled. The old man slowly got up, his eyes filled with concern. The Levite squeezed his concubine's hand, feeling the rising fear. They knew something terrible was about to happen. "Old man, bring out the man who is staying with you. We want to know him." The old man knew what "know him" meant. It was a euphemism for abuse and violence. Horror gripped his heart as he walked to the door with heavy steps and a face marked by despair. "Please, my friends, do not commit such wickedness. This man is my guest, my responsibility. Do not do such a vile thing." The wicked men were unwilling to listen. Their eyes, injected with lust and malice, were fixed on the house. The old man, in an act of desperation, even offered his own daughter and the Levite's concubine in a desperate attempt to protect his guest and avoid the worst. "Here is my virgin daughter and this man's concubine. I will bring them out to you, and you can do with them what you please, but do not commit such an outrage against this man." But what happened next is unthinkable. In a moment of despair, the Levite made a terrible choice. With a heavy heart and a mind gripped by fear, he pushed his concubine out the door, closing it quickly behind her. Her screams of horror filled the night as the men seized her and dragged her away. They abused her all night long, several wicked men taking turns doing as they pleased with her. The night turned into a living nightmare. The concubine suffered the brutality of the men until dawn, when she was finally left lifeless at the entrance of the house where she had been staying with the Levite. When the first light of day broke the darkness, the full tragedy was revealed. The Levite, with a disturbing coldness, placed the concubine's body on a donkey and began the journey home. But the darkness of that night would not end there. The heinous act that followed would plunge an entire nation into a cycle of violence and vengeance. With steady hands and a cold heart, he cut the concubine's body into 12 parts. Each cut was made with precision and a disturbing coldness, a calculated act to shock and mobilize. He knew that the horror of his gesture would resonate deeply throughout the nation. When he finished, he wrapped each part of the body in cloths and sent one part to each of the 12 tribes of Israel, with a letter detailing what had been done by their own brothers. This horrific act was more than just a call for help. It was a call to arms, a summons for the entire nation to rise against the injustice and depravity committed in Gibeah. The tribes of Israel were stunned and horrified upon receiving the packages. The sight of the mutilated body parts was unbearable, a visceral symbol of the brutality that had been inflicted. The initial shock quickly turned to fury and determination. This cannot be tolerated. We must unite and punish those responsible for this vile act. The Levites' call united the tribes of Israel like never before. They gathered in Mizpah, determined to seek justice and avenge the brutalized concubine. The consensus was clear. The tribe of Benjamin, which harbored the wicked men of Gibeah, must be severely punished. Observing this, we can see that the story demonstrates the consequences of the lack of centralized leadership. The absence of a king meant that justice was difficult to ensure, and atrocities could occur with impunity. Notice in the book of Judges, chapter 19, verse 1, which we read earlier, I'll read again. The phrase, "In those days Israel had no king," suggests not only a lack of political leadership, but also a lack of spiritual leadership. The judges, who were temporary leaders raised by God to guide the people, were absent or inept, resulting in a period of moral and spiritual chaos. Today we still face similar challenges. Although we may have governments and laws, justice is not always guaranteed, and violence can arise unexpectedly. Dehumanization, inequality, and lack of empathy are issues that continue to haunt our communities. Continuing, I would like to encourage you to read chapters 20 and 21 in detail, but to summarize, the Levite achieved more than just personal revenge. His macabre act triggered a civil war, a conflict that nearly wiped out the tribe of Benjamin. The battles were fierce and bloody, with thousands of lives lost in a cycle of violence that seemed endless. The violence that began with an act of cowardice and wickedness led to unimaginable bloodshed. The tribe of Benjamin was almost annihilated, and the land was marked by the brutality of the combats. The story of Judges 19 is a warning about what can happen when people turn away from God and His commandments. It challenges us to reflect on our own faith and the importance of living according to divine principles of justice, mercy, and love. In a world where dehumanization and violence are still prevalent, the story calls us to be agents of positive change, guided by faith and the moral values taught by God. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and activate the bell to receive notifications. Until next time, and remember, darkness is always lurking,